All right, we're going to pull back the curtain on a story that, well, you definitely didn't learn in history class. We're talking about the secret bankers who really built America.
So let me just ask you this. What if I told you that a handful of families, not governments, not presidents, were the ones who quietly built the entire financial skeleton of America? Would you even believe me?
And that way before Silicon Valley and Wall Street, there were these, well, invisible bankers who were shaping wars, building cities, and even deciding how much your paycheck is worth.
Well, that is the untold story of the dynasties who literally controlled the money before America even had a dollar to its name.
Okay, so to really get this, we've got to rewind. I mean, way back, to a time before the US dollar was even a thing.
You know, what's so wild about this is when you look at it, America was basically a startup, and it was funded by private money. Seriously, the Revolutionary War, it wasn't paid for by some big government treasury. Nope, it was financed by rich merchants and loans from other countries. And then, get this, just 5 years later, the very first bank in the country wasn't public. It was a private business. Even Alexander Hamilton's big idea, the first bank of the US, was this mix of public and private cash. So the main thing to remember here is that from day one, private money and public power were totally tangled up together.
And right there, that's the foundation of what we call old money. Look, this isn't just about being rich, right? It's about wealth that's held onto for generations, creating these families with super deep, long-lasting influence. It's a whole different kind of power. We're not talking about a lottery win or some tech IPO. This is something way more dug in.
So, that foundation of private financial power, that was just the warm-up act. Things absolutely exploded during the Gilded Age. You know, that crazy period of industrial growth in the late 1800s? That's when these families started building a real, honest-to-goodness empire.
Okay, if you really want to wrap your head around the scale of this power, just look at this number, 3%. In 1901, a single guy, J.P. Morgan, had personal wealth equal to almost 3% of the entire U.S. GDP. To put that in perspective, today that would be like one person having a net worth of over $700 billion. I mean, that's not just being rich, that's financial power on the same level as an entire country.
And this right here, this really shows you the two different Americas that were operating at the time. On one side, you've got the president, right? The official, elected power. But on the other side, you had the bankers. They worked in private, with almost no oversight, and they had enough power to literally bail out the US government. Not once, but twice. Just think about that for a second. The entire country is about to go bankrupt, and who does it turn to? Not its own treasury, but a few private guys.
And this quote from J.P. Morgan himself just says it all, doesn't it? I owe the public nothing. Wow. I mean, that perfectly sums up the whole mindset. This was never about public service. It was about capital, and it was about control. In their minds, they were the ones really running the economy, and they didn't have to answer to anyone.
But, you know, that kind of obvious in-your-face personal power, that couldn't last forever. So the next phase of their influence was a lot sneakier and, honestly, a lot more permanent. They started shaping the actual institutions that run the modern world.
And the best example of this? The creation of the Federal Reserve. See, the problem was the country kept getting slammed by these financial panics that were just crippling everything. So what was the solution? Well, in 1910, a small club of the most powerful bankers in the country met in total secret on a place called Jekyll Island. And it was there that they cooked up the blueprint for a central bank. That plan, it became the Federal Reserve, basically baking their influence into the system for good.
And that was the big shift. It was brilliant, really. Instead of having to personally bail out the government, they built a permanent institution that would do it for them. So suddenly, the power wasn't just in the hands of a few famous guys anymore. It was embedded, it was institutionalized, it was woven right into the DNA of the American economy.
Okay, so what does any of this have to do with us today? Well, that brings us to the shadow of influence that still hangs over everything.
See, the influence didn't just vanish, it just changed its clothes. Today, that old money power moves through all these different channels. You see it in giant philanthropic foundations that shape public policy, in huge university endowments that decide what gets researched, and in these super powerful, super private family offices that manage all this dynastic wealth, moving billions of dollars around completely behind the scenes.
And this chart right here is the proof. Just look at where the funding for our major cultural institutions comes from. Nearly half of it, 45%, comes from a handful of private family foundations.
That gives them a massive, even if it's subtle, say in our public conversations, our art, and what we as a society decide is important.
And really, this is the thing to take away from all this. The financial system they designed, the banking rules, the central bank, the way money moves, that's the exact same system you are using every single day. Every time you swipe your credit card, or get a loan, or even just get paid, you're playing inside the house they built over 100 years ago.
So, that leaves us with one last big question. The names have changed, right? The Morgans and the Rockefellers of the Gilded Age, they've been replaced by the titans of tech and modern finance. But when you really look at the underlying structure of power, the way influence works, has the game really changed, or is it just new players on the same old board? Something to think about. Thanks for tuning in.